Support for Radio Friends comes from IT Como, offering computer and IT services for small businesses and residential clients. IT Como can set up remote work-at-home solutions and data security and backup systems and upgrade your company email to more modern platforms. IT Como can also help you get the most from your technology at home. Learn more at itcomo.com. Good morning and welcome to Radio Friends on Friday, September the 23rd. Good to have you with us today. You know, we've all been talking about coronavirus, COVID. Have we talked about long COVID? We've heard the term, but what is long COVID? I want to introduce you to Dr. Satish Kalanjeri. Good to have you here.
Thank you for having us,
Dr. Jeremy Johnson from the VA hospital. When you're on, we've normally talked about breathing problems and asthma and so forth. Well, how does long COVID fit into that? And what is long COVID?
Well, that's a million-dollar question because I don't think there is a strong definition of long COVID. But the general consensus is that if one contacts COVID, the symptoms usually get better by 2 to 4 weeks, within 2 to 4 weeks. So if you have symptoms that persist, any kind of symptoms that persist beyond 4 weeks or beyond 2 months or 2 to 3 months, then that is considered long COVID. And these symptoms don't necessarily have to be respiratory symptoms. They can be, vague symptoms such as tiredness, fatigue, not being able to sleep. And then there can also be pulmonary symptoms such as, cough, shortness of breath, and so on. And therefore, while long COVID is a terminology that is popularly used, in the medical world, there's no consensus on what the terminology should be, but in general, we call it post-COVID conditions. And it is specifically called conditions and not a condition. It's also called a post-COVID syndrome, and because it encompasses all of these different symptoms.
Is there treatment for long COVID, or is it just something your body has to take care of itself?
There may be treatment. Now, what we're still finding out about, how long COVID will play out and how long the symptoms will last. And a lot of patients, the symptoms might get better over weeks, months. For some, they might last years. This concept or this phenomenon of continued symptoms after an illness is not new. We've seen that with other conditions, and therefore a proportion of patients will recover, a proportion of patients will have lingering symptoms, and therefore the treatment for it would depend on what the patient is experiencing at the time, and then Dr. Johnson and I were discussing this outside. The treatment is pretty much individualized, so we'll have to see what is best for a patient at any given time. Then
now both of you have had COVID, both of you,
correct?
And you both had the shots and the boosters, but the important thing to keep in mind is it was short. And you did not have to be hospitalized. Now, Jeremy, you had COVID how long ago?
May of 2022.
Did you do anything to treat it after you were tested?
No, just symptomatic treatment of rest and symptomatic.
Now,
treatment.
if you had not had the shot, it would have been a totally different story.
Yeah, I suspect I would have been more ill, and then I suspect I would have looked at some of the monoclonal antibodies or antibody concoctions that we can take now, but my symptoms seemed to be mild, and I'd been fully vaccinated and boosted, and so I elected to just kind of treat the symptoms and stay home and obviously isolate and stay away from people.
Now, Dr. Kalanjeri, you said you had some mental fog after you recovered from the COVID. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I had, what a lot of people would term as brain fog. I didn't think, I had this vague tiredness, and I would take my time to think about things, and, my emotions were kind of subdued and so on. It was actually pretty good not to get excited about things.
Right.
But it did take several weeks for me to recover from it. And my dear friend and colleague here, Dr. Johnson, says that's not true. He says, I've not yet recovered from it even now. But I've declared myself symptom-free.
Okay. Now, here's another question I have for both of you. There's a small group of people who have not had coronavirus. Is there and thank God I can knock on wood, I've had all of the shots. I had the 2 original shots, and then I had the 2 boosters. And I'm so superstitious, I'm almost afraid. I'm not bragging about it, but I've not had the coronavirus. But so many people I know around me have been infected. Why are there some people who still have not had it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and we may not have the answer to that question right now, but I mean, from the beginning, we talked about social distancing, social isolating, masking, good hand hygiene. So maybe you've done all those things exceptionally well.
I have, but I also know people who are very bullheaded, and they've refused to take the shot. And to the best of my knowledge, they haven't had it. Now, they could be concealing it because they're ashamed, but there are a certain group of people that just have not had it.
So maybe it has something to do with that individual's immune system or how their body responds to when they're exposed to virus, or maybe they've just been lucky. We talked about luck.
Yeah.
Maybe they just haven't been exposed to the virus or a certain load of the virus. And so we don't know for sure, but it does bring up a great question and something that's thought provocative to think about why do some people not.
But the important thing to do, I mean, it's only common sense. Take those shots.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's the point with long COVID or this post-COVID syndrome, is that research has demonstrated that people that are vaccinated, whether they don't get COVID or whether they get a breakthrough case, they're much less likely to have the long-term effects if you've been vaccinated. So to say that another way, if somebody that has never been vaccinated gets COVID, then they have a greater chance of getting these long-term symptoms that may linger on for more than 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year. We just don't know all those answers yet.
I was talking to someone earlier today who had COVID and was in the hospital. This was before the vaccinations were available. Was in the hospital and almost died. She knows another person who had COVID and is paralyzed from the waist down. Now, I have never heard of that happening. Have you?
I haven't specifically encountered that case, but we do know that it potentially can affect joints, and so maybe that person might have joint inflammation and things post-COVID, but I don't know.
But the important thing is get your vaccination.
Yes, the vaccinations, as you pointed out and Dr. Johnson pointed out, are very important because even patients who have had mild COVID can go on to have pretty severe symptoms in terms of long COVID in the future.
So vaccine to prevent the disease and to prevent the long-term symptoms.
We're out of time. If you want more information, you can check out the VA Hospital website. Doctors, thank you so much for coming by. It's always a pleasure to visit with you. Okay? Please come back again.
Thank you, Paul.
All right. Something you'd like to hear or see, drop me an email, pepperp@missouri.edu. Bye-bye.